Hi, Pastor Charlie here for New Hope Lutheran Church. Welcome to Pastor Charlie's Toolbox. You know, I've noticed that some people get rather passionate about their lumber, whereas most people do not, but some people do. For a lot of people, a board is just a board. It's wood. You build something with it, and that's it. But there's a reason that some people get passionate about their wood. Now, I mean, if you look at this board here, it's pretty dull. It's just a piece of spruce like you would use for simple house or building framing. It's not really all that impressive, is it? On the other hand, though, just a minute, this is a board. It's a piece of ash lumber. It's rough cut right off the sawmill. It's got what's called a live edge, which means on one side there's still some bark on it, and it's a good looking board. It's also more than that, though. It's a piece of lumber with a story to tell if you know where to look. For instance, see how the piece is notched out here? It's not cut straight across. Well, that's where the lumberjack notched out the tree to make it fall in a certain direction. And it tells us then that this board came from the very bottom of the tree because that's where they notch it when they fell it. And then you have the story that the grain has to tell us, and I'm going to move it closer. Now, if you look closely at it, you should be able to see the lines, and that's called the grain. When this was growing, it would add a layer of bark to the tree each year, and you can actually, for this part, you can count the layers. And if you count the layers, you'll have a pretty good idea of just how old this tree was. Starting, well, I couldn't get right to the center, but starting here, there are at least 30 layers. 30 of them, which means the tree is a minimum of 30 years old, plus whatever is hidden in here. So it was maybe 40 years old. You can also see how much the tree grew, that there were some better years and some worse years when you get here. The wider ones were better years when it had more water and food and sunlight, and the skinny ones were years that didn't grow very well. You might also notice down here that there's a knot, and that's where a branch was growing out of the tree when it was a very young tree. It's got a lot to tell us, all by itself. But if you do a little research on a board like this, you'll find out it has even more to tell us. Just knowing that this is ash lumber, that tells us something about what this board might become in the future. Because ash is a very durable wood, but it has elasticity to it as well, ash has been used to make hockey sticks, canoe paddles, tennis rackets, or pieces of furniture. Some acoustic guitars are even made from ash. So when you take a good look at this board and you take the time to examine it, you can see its story. And you might get some idea of why I think this is a lot more exciting than one might first imagine. It has a lot to tell us. Now, I suspect you're wondering at this point what I'm leading up to here. Well, quite often people think about the Bible like people think about this piece of spruce lumber. It's just another example of something. That's just an example of some pretty plain wood. There's not a lot interesting there. And people think a lot about the Bible the same way. It's just another book. Maybe there's not a lot of interesting information in there. The thing is, with the Bible, as with this piece of lumber, the more you examine it, the more you look at it, the more you study it, the more you research about it, well, you discover some amazing things contained in the Bible, just like we discovered about this piece of lumber. There are many stories to be had in the Bible as well. Stories about people like you and me who had their high and low points in life and how they got through those times. There are stories that explain things we might never have even thought of before. There are meanings to be found on multiple levels regarding life, how to live life to the fullest, and even what's to come in the future after life. And this was all summed up very well by the disciple Peter in our lesson for today from John 6, 56 to 69. In that lesson, people were actually leaving Jesus because they couldn't understand him. They couldn't see the big picture that Jesus was presenting to them. All they saw or wanted to see, perhaps, was a plain piece of lumber, instead of looking closer to see the whole story and see where they fit into it. And when Jesus questioned the disciples to see if they were going to abandon him as well, Peter replied with the wonderful words, "Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words of eternal life." In other words, there's a lot more to see than what first meets the eye. So I encourage you to study those words of eternal life and at the same time discover the fullness of God's story in your life.